Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this seminar. Special welcome to our featured speaker, guest of honor, and dear friend, IFPRI-Director General Shenggen Fan. Shenggen, you are known worldwide as a leader in food policy research. It's a pleasure to see IFPRI grow and expand in quality and quantity. Over the 5 years you are now heading that wonderful institutions. It's great to see the great performance of a successor. So let me, on this personal note, start my introduction to this workshop. This afternoon, you present an important report, actually also an innovation which you introduced at IFPRI, the Global Food Policy Report 2014-2015. You introduce it here to a Bonn audience. The audience, Shenggen, is a mix of CEF researchers, juniors and seniors, policy-interested members of Bonn community, juniors and seniors, formers and present, I meant to say, and colleagues from GIZ and the research community here in Bonn. I'm sure they will spread the good word. Colleagues, we have gotten the report for handouts. I'm afraid, Clemens, we have miscalculated. There may be more than I had asked you to send. Let me also introduce IFPRI senior researcher Clemens Breisinger, who is accompanying Shenggen today, who actually has a foothold in Germany, working for IFPRI somewhere from Frankfurt. Come again, come more frequently, Clemens. Today, Shenggen will focus his talk on tackling food and nutrition insecurity in middle-income countries. In middle-income countries, MICs, MICs. Shenggen, we really look forward to your presentation. Addressing the middle-income countries, food and nutrition insecurity problem. What should they do themselves? What role for development, cooperation, for knowledge partnership? You will tell us that almost about half of hunger and undernutrition is still in the middle-income countries. So tell us what to do and what's the situation. I ask for a warm applause for welcoming Shenggen Fan.
Well, thank you, Joachim. I'm so glad to see lots of friends here. I think so many friends I have worked with for some time. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your championship and even your funding support, from BMD and others. So Joachim mentioned that IFPRI has grown, not only in terms of its scope, but also in terms of its depth. Now we are in more than 20 countries physically. We are working in more than 50 countries. 40% of our staff are not in Washington. So they are in Africa, they are in Asia, China, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Africa, more than 10 countries. So IFPRI is a global institute, although the current headquarters is still in Washington. Well, actually, I don't spend much time in Washington anyway. I think largely because of IFPRI's strong leadership from Joachim and many others. So we made a couple of strategic directions for the last 2 years that has had a fundamental impact on IFPRI. One is decentralization. I mean, even when Joachim was there, around 2002 or 2003, so IFPRI made a strategic decision to decentralize our operation to many different countries. So that decision was so wise, was so timely. So without decentralized operation today, I couldn't imagine what would be IFPRI today. So basically decentralization saved IFPRI. So another dimension of IFPRI's new direction is our work on nutrition. So nutrition is not just a work by nutritionists. Actually, it has lots of economics, sociology, or even engineers. So IFPRI made a decision to move towards that direction. So large IFPRI growth for the last 5 years came from our nutrition work. So the nutrition is not just the work by nutritionists. In fact, most of the economists, including Clemens, are probably half converted nutritionists, in addition to what they are right now, the economists. So I just wanted to express our appreciation to our former leaders like Joachim von Brand, Pierre Binstra, and Anderson. So this year we're going to celebrate our 40 years anniversary. So IFPRI is 40 years old now, still very young. I hope we still have 40 years to go. And so it's time to celebrate what we have achieved. It's more important to see what we should do in the future. So the wise decision made 5 to 10 years ago has tremendous impact on IFPRI's future. So IFPRI's Global Food Policy Report is a flagship publication. This year is our 4th publication. Many policymakers, analysts, decision makers have used the reports in their decision making, in convincing others to take the right action, right policy. And this year's focus is on middle income countries. Okay, let me see. So this year, we focus on middle income countries. And you will see we have achieved tremendously for the last 2 decades, since 1990. So we are almost on track in reducing hunger by half. So for the last, it's 25 years, 24 years, the world has reduced the number of hungry people by more than 200 million. So the percentage of hunger has dropped from 19% to 11% today. So this year, if we see the FAO's new estimation of hungry people, I would not be surprised that by the end of 2015, we have achieved MDG 1B, that is to cut hunger by half from 1990 to 2015. And even more so, we have achieved MDG 1A, cutting poverty by half from 1990 to 2015. We actually achieved that target, that goal, 5 years ahead of schedule. In 20 years, we were able to bring 700 million people out of poverty. It's a tremendous progress. And then look at the economic growth. For 2014, middle-income countries, low-income countries have grown much faster than OECD countries at 4.4% per year. And for advanced economies, it has grown only at 1.8%. And that trend will continue. For 2014, we have also seen the lowest food prices for the last 4 years. The major staple crops like rice, wheat, and maize have touched the bottom for the last 4 years. As you know, this has tremendous implications on many poor and hungry people. The good news, and for 2014, in the policy areas, the results have been very mixed. We have achieved progress in making sure that the nutrition is very high in global development agenda. So I will come back to this later. And greater understanding role of water, sanitation, and hygiene. I'm so glad that ZEF is also also has a project with Gates to look at that important issue. So it's not just food. WASH, gender, and other broader development issues are equally important in affecting child stunting. The IFPRI study shows that in India, 30% of the child stunting reduction comes from food, 30% comes from improvement in WASH, and 30% comes from gender and nutrition-specific intervention. So it's not just food. So today we have much better understanding on the other factors that also contributed to improvement in nutrition. And new commitments on trade and climate. Last November, US and India finally signed an agreement to let the trade facilitation continue to go. So that saved WTO. And again, last November, when the US President Obama traveled to China, he signed an agreement with Chinese president to agree on important milestones of climate change. So China will cap its carbon emission by 2020. US will reduce its carbon emission by 20% by 2020. In fact, the good news is last year, China, first time to see some reduction in carbon emission. And from January to April, the carbon emission reduction was even much bigger than last year, partly because of the increased use of renewable energy and the reduction of coal-based energy. Increased attention to resilience. The global food system has become volatile, vulnerable because of many factors: conflicts, climate change, higher food prices, or volatile food prices. So how can we make sure that our global food system is resilient? So last May, IFPRI hosted a flagship event called the 2020 Conference in Addis Ababa to zoom in a very important issue of resilience. So many of you came to that conference. So it's not just implementation to link short-term relief to long-term development, but it also has very important implications on our research agenda. As a result of that, IFPRI has planned to develop resilience as one of the strategic themes, and we are in a process of recruiting researchers to working on that issue. Focus on family farming. 2014 is the year of family farming. So smallholders, family-based smallholders, still account for a large percentage of poor, hungry, and undernourished population. To solve their problem, obviously not only help them to be out of poverty and hunger, but we also help the whole society to reduce hunger and poverty. 2014 remains very vulnerable in terms of food and nutrition security, persistent conflicts. So there's a chapter authored by Clemens here on the conflicts. We have seen increased correlation between conflicts and malnutrition. It is in some of the countries in conflicts where we have seen increased malnutrition, particularly undernutrition. Syria, Iraq, Mali, Somalia, and beyond. So despite the progress made in many other regions, but countries in conflict have seen increased malnutrition. And re-emerging zoonotic diseases. I'm glad that the Christian has come back to ZEF. In 2014, many countries suffered from emerging diseases. Ebola in 3 West African countries killed more than 10,000 people. It is a tragedy. 10,000 people died. But it's equally damaging that 300,000, 400,000 people suffered from hunger and malnutrition. And that damage, whether it's mental or physical, will be permanent, will affect their life for a long time. So let's not forget the cost of hunger and malnutrition in addition to the 10,000 deaths. And we'll continue the extreme weather shocks, droughts, floods continued, and the pattern have become even more erratic in many parts of the world. And the rising food safety scandals. You might have heard the food scandals in Taiwan, in China, in Vietnam. The contamination of meat, of milk, vegetables, and fruits. People died. Children suffered from malnutrition, diarrhea, stunting because of the food safety issues. And Asian countries, particularly China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, have placed food safety as one of the top priorities. So even their national leaders discuss about food safety issues in their day-to-day media conferences and mainstream food safety issues into their work. The higher price of nutritious foods. So ironically, we have also seen increased prices of fruits and vegetables in many parts of the world. India, China, and many other countries. As you know, fruits and vegetables are micronutrients intense. So increased prices will cause more. It's called hidden hunger. So which is, I should thank Germany for the leadership in pushing the hidden hunger into the global development agenda. The hidden hunger probably is equally damaging than visible hunger. So visible hunger, you can see people hungry. They are, let's say, underweight. They don't have enough to eat. But hidden hunger, you even don't know whether that person, even myself, lack of micronutrients. And there are more people who suffer from hidden hunger than visible hunger. But for 2014, it is also full of hopes. SDG development, 17 goals, 269 targets. Yeah, too many goals, too many targets. But I think the global community have worked together to come up with defined goals, defined targets, and also measurable indicators. And the more important is how national governments will take these indicators seriously to mainstream SDGs into their economic growth, into their development. So this is some of the areas we must work together. Yes, China and the US signed the climate change deal. More work needs to be done, and particularly in agriculture. In China, 30%, maybe even more, of the carbon emission or greenhouse gas emission comes from agriculture. And I personally believe there are lots of win-win opportunities. It's just the wrong policy or wrong investment strategies. And the climate change event, Lima started that debate. And when we come to Paris this November, and we must make concrete commitment. And to me, the climate agenda and SDGs are one agenda. So we should not separate these two. We engage with these two events separately, whether it's in New York, or whether it's in Lima, or Paris, or many other occasions. But there must be one agenda. So how can sustainable development goals development without considering the climate change, and vice versa? The Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, CSA is Climate Smart Agriculture. Last September, during the UN General Assembly, this initiative was launched. IFPRI was a founding member, and CGIAR is a founding member. CGIAR is a consultative group for international agriculture research. So we are very much committed to make sure that agriculture will be adapted to climate change, and equally important, how can agriculture be used to mitigate the climate change? ICN2 is second Global Nutrition Conference. Many of you were there. Joachim was there. I was there. I'm so glad to see that national leaders, 60 national leaders, global leaders, are committing themselves to use nutrition, to place nutrition as one of the highest development priorities. So the German Minister of Development, German Minister of Agriculture were all there. Now, the important question is how can we really maintain that momentum? As a research organization like IFPRI, we also made our own commitment, although we don't have the money. We didn't make any commitment on money, but we were committed to use research-based evidence to guide the decision, guide the investment strategy, guide the policy to make sure that nutrition outcome will be achieved through development, through policy changes, and through investment. The Compact 2025 was an initiative that we announced at ICM2. So I'll come back to this initiative later. Middle-income countries play a key role in eliminating hunger and malnutrition. Joachim already mentioned that more than half of hungry people, malnourished people, are actually in middle-income countries, despite their rapid economic growth. India, China, Brazil, Mexico, and Indonesia. So not only just because of their size, but even in terms of the percentage of hunger and malnutrition level, particularly in India, Indonesia, are as high as low-income countries. And they are global economic houses. In fact, these countries account for 60–70% of the global growth. China itself accounts for probably 40% of the global economic growth. If you add India, that share will be even bigger. So this year, next year, probably India will replace China in terms of absolute growth rates. But in terms of added net growth, I think China will still be probably the largest one because of the size of the economy. So this country's effort will not only help these countries to end hunger and malnutrition, it can also help other countries, low-income countries, in their effort in reducing hunger and malnutrition through trade, through investment, through mutual learning. So the strategies for middle-income countries will be very different from low-income countries. It's not foreign aid. It's not the money. It's their strategy. It's their investment priorities. It's their policy that needs to be reformed, needs to be changed. Growth is very important, but it's not enough. Look at the relationship between growth, economic growth, and a reduction in child stunting. Yes, there's a linear relationship, almost a linear relationship. So 1%, 10% growth in GDP will lead to 6% reduction in stunting. If you do a linear regression, you will see that relationship. However, you will see another outliers, India in particular. So despite rapid growth in India, improvement in nutrition has not made much progress. Called Indian shame. I remember 6 or 7 years ago when IFPRI senior managers, including Joachim, met with the Prime Minister at that time, Mr. Singh. Singh was very, very much committed to nutrition. He even formed a nutrition commission committee, and he said that it's an Indian shame to have such a high level of malnutrition, undernutrition. I'm afraid since then, not much progress has been made. So this link between growth and improvement in nutrition persists. And many other countries, any countries beyond that purple shape shows that economic growth has not led much reduction in undernutrition than average. Any country below that line, their growth has led much progress in reducing stunting, child stunting. So you will see India, the big bubble there. China actually is below that. But equally damaging is the increased overweight and obesity. India, China, Brazil, and Mexico. I don't have the Mexico on the right-hand side. Mexico now has the highest rate of overweight and obesity, even higher than US. So Mexico has become the number 1, US number 2. So for every 10% growth in GDP, it will lead to 7% increasing overweight and obesity on average. And you will see some countries are above that average 9, and some countries are below that, that 9. However, this is a static relationship. For the last 10 years, the growth rates of obesity and overweight in China and India are much higher than the economic growth rates. Now in Shanghai, the first time, we see more overweight, obese people than otherwise. So over 50% of people in Shanghai are either obese or overweight. So for these middle-income countries, they are experiencing what's called triple burden of malnutrition, triple burden. So number one is undernutrition, whether it's measured by undernourishment, lack of dietary energy, or child stunting. So this is one burden. Second burden is hidden hunger, lack of micronutrients. Cost of hidden hunger is equally high than visible hunger. The third burden is overnutrition, whether it's overweight and obese. You will see all these middle-income countries are experiencing one or two burdens, and some countries actually are experiencing triple burdens. Look at Mexico, India. And I'm afraid in the future, the third burden will accelerate in the next 5 to 10 years if the policies, if the strategies are not implemented. And well, these middle-income countries vary by size, vary by their economic structure, vary by even their economic development level, vary by geographic location. But they do share some common features. So number one is rising inequalities. All these countries have experienced rising inequalities. Number two is urbanization and a changing consumer preferences. And number three is a lack of focus on nutrition, poor targeting, and safety nets. In terms of rising inequalities, women, smallholders in particular, they do not have equal access to productive assets, do not have equal access to services, agricultural services, social services, India, even China, Indonesia. So when we look at inequalities in these countries, women, smallholders, needs more attention. And then you look at the chart from India, starting by wealth quantile in India. Now you will see, okay, the change over time. Top 9 is 2006. The lowest 9 is in 1993. You will see such a great improvement in child stunting in high level of, in the high percentile of the wealth, which means the richer they are, the more progress they have achieved in terms of reducing the stunting. If you look at the poor quantile, you will see almost no progress in reducing child stunting. So high inequalities obviously are very much linked to the reduction in stunting. So urbanization and changing consumer preferences. Many countries, many middle-income countries have been urbanized rapidly. My own country, the first time in 2012, there are more urban population than rural population. And today this year urbanization rate probably is 55%. Will be 60% by 2020. So rapid urbanization. It is also true in India and Indonesia. And as people are urbanized, as their income increase, they will demand more and better food. Look at the right chart. Between now and 2020, you will see in developing countries, the meat consumption, like poultry, pork, beef, sheep meat, will increase by 20 to 30% compared to very little growth in OECD countries or rich countries. The coarse grains will also increase. The demand for coarse grains in middle-income countries, in low-income countries, we also increase this because these coarse grains will be used to feed animals. Lack of focus on nutrition and poor targeting safety nets. So most of middle-income countries have social safety nets. India, China, Brazil, Mexico, even Indonesia. But they rarely link that to nutrition. And a poor targeting and leakage can weaken safety nets. India has very large leakage. Most of them, the social protection funds actually do not reach to the poor people. So we need better targeted and more productive social policies. Increase the coverage. In case of China, the coverage is still very small, 20%. On average, much lower coverage. In China, in particular, the coverage is very, very, very low. So firstly, we need to increase the coverage. Secondly, better target to the poorest poor. Thirdly, link the social protection to nutrition, to health. So proven policies that promote hunger reduction and nutrition will be key. The policies will be key. It's not just a total aid, they don't need aid anymore. We know that investment in nutrition have very high returns. IFPRI study shows that every dollar invested in nutrition, returns could be $30 on average. In some countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, India, the returns will be even higher. So investment in nutrition to reduce malnutrition, undernutrition, is not only a moral issue, it's not only a rights issue, but it's also an economic issue. So it's a good investment. And the overnutrition, obesity, also can cost us substantially. So obesity every year costs us $2% of the GDP, $2 trillion in 2012. That's 3 years ago. But today, the cost of the economic loss will be much higher than that. So how can we make sure that the middle-income countries can really accelerate their progress in reducing hunger and malnutrition? Reshape agriculture for nutrition and health. So agriculture's objective is not just to produce more rice, wheat, and maize. More importantly, is to make sure that agriculture is accountable for improvement in nutrition and health. Reduce inequalities, focus on gender and smallholders, so we have already mentioned about that. And improve rural infrastructure, particularly sanitation. You can look at the toilet there. So in India, there's a slogan, no toilet, no marriage. When a girl wants to marry some boys, the toilet is a must. Expand effective social safety nets. I will come back to this one. And facilitate South-to-South knowledge sharing. How can these countries help other countries in accelerating their efforts in reducing hunger and malnutrition? Reshape agriculture for nutrition and health. Can we make ministers of agriculture accountable to the nutrition outcome? The well-nourished population, instead of rice sufficiency, wheat self-sufficiency, or maize self-sufficiency. Increase incentives for higher nutrient foods and reduce distorted incentives for low nutrient staples. During lunch, I had a conversation with Joachim. So I made some sort of very proactive argument in China. I said the current agriculture policy in China is bad for environment, bad for people's health, and bad for economy. And the leaders didn't like that. They asked me to explain. Now I can explain to you whether you will be convinced, just like the Chinese leader. So why? With the current policy, subsidize water, energy, fertilizer to produce more rice, wheat, rice and wheat. There's two major crops. Because of the subsidies, farmers would overuse fertilizers, overuse water, overuse energy. It's bad for environment. All this will contribute to more carbon emission. All this will contribute to depletion of underground water, pollution of underground water. It's also not good for health. Because of the subsidies, the prices of stable foods like rice and wheat and maize are artificially lower than it should be. So it's very ironic that China purchased farm products at much higher prices than international market than its cost. But in the meantime, the processors, consumers, wanted to use the imported one because they're cheaper. So millions of tons of grains purchased by the government are sitting in the government stocks. So China has 80 million tons of maize, 80 million tons of rice because of the subsidies. And every year China would spend 100 billion yuan just to keep that grain in stock, which is almost 10 times bigger than agriculture research investment. Anyway, I hope you have been convinced. And then investment in nutrition-specific, nutrition-sensitive interventions. Yes, some of the nutrition-specific interventions, supplements of iron, zinc, vitamin A, can solve the micronutrients deficiency of population in short run. In longer run, I still believe the food-based system will be able to help them. And adopt a value chain approach. We must integrate nutrition, the whole value chain, every component of the value chain. So from the selection of seeds, it's a biofortified seeds can help to improve the nutrition, even with the same crops, same foods. And then farming practices have to keep the nutrition. Obviously, processing, transportation have to maintain the nutrition. Large percentage of nutrition is lost during the process. In many cases, actually, processing, get rid of the more nutritious elements. Rice, you polish rice instead of brown rice. Wheat instead of whole grain, you have white flours. So all this are bad for nutrition. And reduce food losses and waste. Yeah, we heard that 30%, 40% of food is lost, is wasted. So my New Year resolution is to reduce food waste and loss. So I published an article in the China Daily in the beginning of the new year. So how China, or as a Chinese citizen, can contribute to reduce food loss and food waste. And agriculture research can play a huge role there. Breeding high-yielding, high-nutrient, climate-ready crops and livestock varieties. So today, CGI's research and also the national research system must pursue multiple wins in introducing new technologies. So it's not just a high yield. Better nutrition, save water, reduce carbon emission. There's a very good example called C4 rice from International Rice Research Institute. That variety can reduce water use by 25 to 30%, increase the yield by 25 to 30%, and can also build the tolerance against drought, against floods. Maybe in the future, they can also add nutrition into rice through biofortification. So multiple wins. So I think policies, investments are equally important in having multiple wins. And improve rural infrastructure, especially sanitation. So improving rail, roads, and electricity can reduce the poverty by a big margin. IFPRI has a global model called IMPACT. The IMPACT model simulated the impact of road investment on the number of hungry people. So from now to the next 15 years, by investing in roads, in electricity, in railroads, we'll be able to reduce hungry people by 57 million, and avoid malnourishment of 4 million children in the next 15 years. And we know that, as I have already said, access to water, sanitation, hygiene are strongly linked to the child stunting reduction. We have some concrete evidence from one of the states in India, Maharashtra, improving sanitation in rural communities, empower the rural communities, the citizens, particularly in terms of improving their sanitation, has large impact on child stunting. Over the last decade, Maharashtra, the whole state was able to reduce child stunting from more than 40% to like 31%, just in one decade. However, at a global level, 18% of rural population still do not have improved water sources. And more than 50% of the population do not have access to good sanitation facilities. So this is particularly true in India. And reduce inequalities with focus on gender. We know that narrowing the gender gap in the access into assets, productive assets, social services, social protection, agriculture services, will be able to help millions, hundreds of millions of people out of hunger. So this is the evidence from a joint study between FAO and IFPRI that was published in 2012, SOFA, Status of Food and Agriculture. And some of the examples to empower women include strengthen land rights, improve their access to inputs and credit, and provide agriculture training and information. Together with Oxford USAID, IFPRI developed an index called Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index. That index measures how women is empowered in agriculture. We're doing a similar thing in nutrition. So we have done some tests in Bangladesh, Guatemala, and Uganda. And many donor agencies, USAID, DFID, and many national governments begin to use these indices to measure how the women are empowered. I really hope at a global level we can use that indicator to track, to monitor, to make the governments accountable to the gender inequality, particularly in the case of empowerment of agriculture, empowerment of women in agriculture. Investment in productive social safety net. Yes, we know that in short run, poor leads to access to nutritious food. The food aid in short run, cash transfers are needed. But let's make sure that in longer run, the poor's assets, poor's capacity will also be developed so they do not depend on aid. Ethiopia case taught us a very good lesson. In the 70s, 80s, Ethiopia was very much dependent on aid. Every year, the donor community provided food aid to them, and they become independent. But starting from 90s or maybe 2010s, a new initiative called the Productive Social Safety Net began to be implemented. The World Bank, DFID, USAID, European Union, many WFP, all supported that program. And IFPRI provided evaluation, nutrient-independent evaluation, provided advice how that program can be linked to productivity. And IFPRI shows that combining the social, combining safety net with agriculture extension, with access to productive safety, productive assets building, can increase the effect on poverty reduction, hunger reduction 4 times, almost 4 times. It's a very significant impact. It's much bigger than safety net alone, much bigger than agricultural program alone. So combining them together have large returns. Similar case in Bangladesh. I had a chance to meet with the Prime Minister Bangladesh, of that country, about a month ago, together with our country program leader, Dr. Ahmad. The Prime Minister still remember what IFPRI did right after big flood in 1997 or 98, when Paul Durash, Steve Hackerblade was there. So IFPRI advised the government to use social safety net to target the poorest poor, but in the meantime to make sure that assets, the poor's assets, their capacity will also be built. And she was a prime minister at that time, so she still remember she used IFPRI's evidence to do that. So the resilience of the whole society, particularly poor farmers, have been built. And 4 or 5 years ago, there was another big cyclone, flood. And this time, very few people died. Almost no people died. And very few poor people suffered from hunger and malnutrition. You can see how this policy research can really influence decision making. But looking to 2015 and beyond, yes, first time we have 2 years in our global food policy report. We used to have 2012, 2013, 2014, but this year we have 2014 and 2015. The reason is we also wanted to have a look, sort of forward looking for the new year. So for 2015, a couple of things we need to watch. Reshape global development agenda. Yes, sustainable development goals will be debated, will be endorsed in September in New York. But more importantly, these goals have to be mainstreamed to different countries. So unless countries lead, drive on the SDG programs, I'm afraid we will not be able to achieve SDGs. MDGs was very much brought in by the national government. They use that to check, monitor their progress, hunger reduction, poverty reduction. So let's make sure that this time the national governments buy into that program. And it's our job to make sure they do that. Then translate the G7 commitments to action. Under Germany's leadership this year, I really hope the food and nutrition security will be high in its development agenda. We know that several years ago, the US led the G7 debate. They created a so-called new alliance. The private sector, asking the private sector to contribute more to global food and nutrition security. The UK took over. UK had a summit called Nutrition for Growth. And this time, I think, it's Germany's turn to make sure that we continue to make sure the global food and nutrition security are high. So it's money, investment must be scaled up, but more importantly, policies, institutions, governance, we're also part of the agenda. And advancing climate talks, yes, Paris event will be very critical. Let's get real, let's get concrete. Unfortunately, right now I have not seen a concrete agriculture agenda in the Paris event. Hopefully in the next few months, that situation will change. Tackling multiple burdens of malnutrition, particularly overweight and obesity. So obesity and overweight will not only cost the society, it will also offset some of the progress of the cutting hunger and malnutrition, or cutting hunger and undernutrition. The resources are very limited. If somebody overeat, then some people probably don't have enough to eat. In Rome last November, we heard from Pope Francis. So he was quite, maybe angry. He's using a heavy word. He's very angry to see the society is very divided. So many millions of people, 2 billion people, are suffering from various forms of undernutrition. In the meantime, even more people, 2.1 billion people, are suffering from overweight and obesity. Let's make sure that we can integrate these two together. And with dealing with the wild cards, oil and food prices. We know that in 2007, 2008, but there are many causes of higher food price spikes. But the higher oil prices, higher volatility of oil prices was one of the reasons why the food prices were very high. Today, food prices are low, lowest for the last 4 years. I'm afraid some of the fundamental factors behind the 2007-2008 food crisis are still in the closet like a ghost. They can come out to haunt us anytime. Oil prices is one. Climate change, extreme weather events, some of the bad trade policies. The WTO has not made much progress on export bans. Certain export bans in Asia have more or less been controlled because of the regional initiative, regional rice initiatives and so on. So we must do a better job to make sure that the global food price spikes that we have experienced in 2007, 2008 will not come back again. Now, as I mentioned, Compact 2025 is an initiative to provide knowledge, best practices, research-based policy solutions to end hunger and malnutrition by 2025. Okay, the first question is why 2025, not 2030? Well, that can be debated. My argument is if you wanted to end extreme poverty by 2030, then you must end hunger before that. But by definition, to end poverty means you have to end hunger, because the poverty is defined in a monetary term. Poverty line is defined by a monetary term that requires to meet your basic food needs multiplied by a factor for other necessities. So we must end hunger before we can end extreme poverty. So why 2025? And as part of the initiative, we will have an innovation lab. And we will create some competitive grants for researchers like you sitting here to compete, innovate new ideas, practices, and to experiment to reduce hunger and malnutrition. So we are going to launch this initiative in November 18, when we celebrate IFPRI's 40 years anniversary. And we will call for competition for the competitive grants. And with that, I thank you very much.
I would like to ask colleagues to ask their challenging questions. We have a bit of time. Thank you for your splendid presentation. You touched on very important issues which we at CEF are interested in, which German development leadership is interested in. At least 3 from the 5 bullet points of your last slide were right of your last but one slide, this one here. The SDG agenda, G7, advancing climate talks are very much connected to Little Bonn in these days. Colleagues, would you like to ask some questions or comment? Please, Christian, kick it off.
Thank you very much, and a very nice talk. I've got 2 questions. You showed in one slide this tremendous anticipated increase in demand for animal protein in developing countries, approximately 30%. We know of the tremendous health gains in terms of animal proteins as part of your nutrition. However, how do we want to achieve a 30% increase in demand from developing countries up to 2020 when we are already stretched, when we are already having difficulties in producing enough animal protein now at an acceptable environmental cost? This would be my first question. The second question, in the beginning you touched upon food safety issues and the recent crisis we've seen. You remember a couple of weeks ago there was this mysterious death causes in southern Nigeria, and people were speculating about potentially a new Ebola-like disease that had its infancy there. In reality, it turned out it was a simple, quote-unquote simple, pesticide intoxication. Now, pesticide intoxication related to food safety play a major role. One would anticipate that this leads to the agricultural research community to think about alternatives, integrated pest management, etc., etc. But in reality, especially in areas with high production, Southeast Asia, and to a certain extent also in parts of Africa, there's hardly any interest in trying to develop production technologies that rely less on pesticides and thereby reduce these kind of issues of food safety and pesticide toxification. Thank you.
Or maybe answer one by one?
Sure, in this case, yes. Maybe
Okay.
we summarize later.
Yes. Well, Christian, I think demand for animal products will continue whether we like it or not. 30% for 10 years, basically 2% per year, which is not that big, right? It's stable foods, probably about 1% per year, 1.5%. So yes, the technology, better practices, will be able to produce more with less, maybe produce more with the same. International Livestock Research Institute and some of the national research institutes are working very hard to make sure that farmers can do that. In the case of India and China, yes, India particularly milk production, and to some extent chicken. The growth rates of milk has been more than 7% per year. This so-called white revolution. Institutional reform, the governance, this National Dairy Board, together with state board, down to the community connectives. So I think, yes, we still can do that. And for chicken, great potential. It's by using new breeds to produce more with less. Most of the technology actually comes from the private sector, not necessarily from National Research Institutes, not from CGIR. CGIR works on diseases, not necessarily for high yielding animals, or except a cow to some extent. So potential is there. Now the food safety is a huge issue. Huge issue. We need a comprehensive approach. In addition to incentives I just mentioned, technology can also help. Technology. 2 years ago, I was in Brazil for a conference organized by the International Union of Food Scientists. They have more than 20,000 members, much bigger than Agricultural Economics Association. I was fascinated by some of the technologies. Can test how fresh the food is, how fresh the meat is, nanotechnology, many others. So we must use technology. And to avoid or to reduce the use of pesticides, I think the GMO must be part of the equations. I know here in Europe, this is a sensitive topic. Again, I just came back from Bangladesh. They introduced this so-called BT brinjal, BT eggplant. Instead of spraying pesticides 6 times, 10 times per season, the farmers don't spray anymore. And then they can produce more because no insects anymore. So farmers reduce the cost of production, increase the yield, and in the meantime, consumers benefited from reduced pesticide residues. I think many BTs have that advantage to reduce the pesticides use. In fact, in my own country, the use of pesticides have been reduced partly because of BT cotton, and not necessarily food. Then, yes, the use of fertilizer is also a very big source of food safety issue, particularly in China. Some of the heavy metals are in fertilizers. So the quality of the fertilizer must improve. The farmers can use less fertilizers, but are more effective, more efficient, and then obviously less harmful to our health. Some of the rice production in southern China has heavy metals because of the inappropriate use of certain fertilizers. Yes, comprehensive approach, policies, incentives, technologies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There was a question here, Nicholas.
Yes. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. As I was reading through the chapter in the report that deals on the middle-income countries, there were a couple of words that I was trying to look for there and that I didn't find in the report. And are linked to issues that we are grappling with also in the project that I'm working in that's called Food Secure. Has to do with culture and food habits. And in the case of the set of countries that you have highlighted in the report, one could say they stand out among the other middle-income countries by the very large ethnic diversity. So many different food cultures there as well, and that might in fact impact negatively on progress on food security and nutrition security. What do you have to say about culture, ethnicity,
Sure.
food security?
Yes, cultural habit are very critical in influencing people's diet. My view on that is education, knowledge account for a big part of that difference. Many mothers simply do not know what constitutes good nutrition. I think even my mother, when we were boys, we would sell more nutritious foods, eggs, to buy more probably rice or more bread. They thought the rice is the best food. So I think the education training will be very critical. Again, in Bangladesh, IFPRI did a study to look at the different modalities of transfers. Food, cash, vouchers, combination of these two. Different modalities have different impact. But if these modalities are combined with mother's education on nutrition, again, the impact will be much bigger. Could be twice or even 3 times bigger than child stunting. So I put education knowledge there, much more important than culture. Then communication is a big part of that story too. How can we really communicate our research-based information to the general citizen? Researchers usually are not good communicators, including myself. So recently we asked a person called Nancy Lee, a guru in so-called social marketing. So how can we really communicate undernutrition and overnutrition to the general citizen to improve their behavior? And we learned a lot from that. And Nancy Lee has experience in anti-smoking campaign, in fasting sit bill campaign in many parts of the world, parts of the US. I think we can learn quite a bit from the social marketing areas. Just market is sort of a social, it's a social goods to general citizens. So pardon me, yes, I agree with cultural, but more important, education, knowledge, market.
Right. All ethnicities should fasten seatbelt and stop smoking.
That's right.
While doing so, periods.
My question relates to climate and agriculture. In my work in global climate issues over the past 10 years and the last 4 years with the Green Climate Fund, I've through the years seen this disconnect between the analytics that numbers show us that agriculture has a very important role in emissions, and also would have a very important role in mitigation. So analytics numbers on one hand, and the small amount of traction that this, let's say, that this insight finds in the global climate conversation. Global climate conversation is very much focused on the energy systems, rightly so. But when you look to climate, to agriculture, it's at least as important. Now, do you have any kind of insight, any kind of explanation why that is, with possible exception of forest and red? So there is a pocket, let's say, pocket of traction. Yeah. My initial guess is that it's a very difficult field to deal with because there are so many actors, so many institutions. It's so fragmented. Whereas in the energy field in Germany, you have 4 big energy power. If you can find a deal with them, you've solved at least that problem.
Sure. Well, 2 points here. Firstly, for the last 2 or 3 years, we have gained some momentum in persuading others. Carbon smart agriculture. Last September was launched in New York. From US, it's a Secretary of the State. And then there were also ministers of non-agriculture there. So last November, right? Give us some time. That's only 6 or 7 months ago. Then the CGIR, this CCAP, the Climate Change and Food Security, have provided very much needed evidence. Sometimes when we talk, okay, 30% from agriculture, from forestry, and what will be the strategies to tackle that. I think we still need more evidence, particularly come down to the field. How can we really implement certain climate smart practices? So India, under our South Asian Program's leadership, we begin to look at the whole village, look at the climate smart village, not just agriculture, under PK's leadership. And we learned quite a bit from that. And I think more evidence, more convincing evidence, not just some sort of global modeling, global statement, down to the community, down to the field, how we can really tackle that. So we have gained some momentum. Now, another point is, maybe we have not focused on the right actors. Global level, whether it's FAO, whether it's IFPRI, whether it's GF, I don't think that's good. National level, who are the big players there? Agriculture and climate mission. I would think China is number 1. India probably number 2. Indonesia number 3. I'm talking about agriculture in addition to forestry. If you talk about forestry, Brazil, Indonesia probably come up very strong. So emerging economies or middle-income countries I mentioned here actually plays a very huge role. Look at China. My guess is huge percentage of carbon emission comes from agriculture or agriculture-related activities, livestock, forestry, and food production. So that's why I should also add another bad layer of current policy. The current policy also is bad for climate change. When you use more water, obviously you have more carbon emission, you use more energy. Fertilizer subsidy. Fertilizer comes from energy. So the current subsidy policy must be removed to make sure that they can also contribute to better climate. And that message has not been taught to the Chinese, to India policymakers, definitely not Indonesian policymakers. So as I can see, we have not focused on the right actors, middle-income countries. Africa. For Africa, more important is their adaptation. I don't think they can do much mitigation, at least right now. So if we can really focus our energy for 5, 6 top emitters, agriculture emitters, and work with them to change their national priority, their policy. I think we can gain much more than we just spread around without priorities, without strategy.
Was any of the hands up related to climate issues? I've registered 4 or 5 hands up. Okay, then I just continue in the order of Jonas. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Marcelo Cunha, and I've worked for IFPRI for 4 years in the Amazon in Brazil, and I'm now doing my PhD at the Free University of Berlin. And thank you very much for the very informative presentation, and I especially like the perspective of extinguishing or diminishing hunger by 2025 before really tackling and eliminating poverty by 2030. And my first question, to put it more in a context, is how do you see the role of CG centers in achieving that? And then more specifically, as you mentioned that it is important to integrate nutrition in the whole value chain, and then considering that there are different actors within value chains and different levels from the local to global level and different interests, how do you see nutrition can be put into value chain development, and is IFPRI working already on that, and how do you see, what are key factors to achieve that?
Yeah, well, thank you. CGIAR is developing second phase of the so-called CGIAR research programs. So the first phase started in 2012, 2 years after you came out.
2004? No, I left 2009.
Oh, sorry.
You started in 2009.
Yeah, 3 years, yeah. 3 years, 2012, beginning of 2012. So 3 years have been finished, and the current phase has been extended to next year. So we are very much in the process of developing the second phase. So in that process, we use SDG as part of our goals. SDG, hunger, malnutrition, poverty reduction. So CGIAR has 3 strategic objectives now: reduce poverty, reduce hunger, malnutrition, and protect natural resources. Each system objective has concrete goals. In terms of hunger reduction, it's 150 million hungry people. Poverty reduction is 100 million poor. Natural resources, I think, I don't know the exact number, certain hectares of land protected or saved against the degradation. So all these indicators, 2 indicators will be mainstreamed into all programs. One is nutrition, the other one is the climate change. So we have a separate nutrition program that IFPRI needs called A4NH, Agriculture for Nutrition and Health. But more importantly is to make sure that all CGIAR programs have nutrition there as their goal. And this is our program's job, to make sure that other programs will use nutrition as their program objective. Climate change is not just CCAP, not just this independent climate change program to work on climate change. Climate change will be mainstreamed into all other CGIAR programs, including policy, including even nutrition program, and obviously commodity program, rice, wheat, maize, livestock. Livestock is another big emitter. So this is very different from what we have done before. And we will have concrete indicators, concrete targets for the whole system to achieve.
Good. Manu.
My name is Emmanuel. I'm a student here. I have 2 questions. One is on chapter 3 on sanitation. It's quite interesting that you have this chapter because also the World Government Report for 2015 has a chapter on sanitation and looking at the same issues on how sanitation could improve nutrition. But actually, for instance, the program that you highlighted on, the India's total sanitation program, I think some of the papers and evidence that is coming out show that actually it's not improving nutrition as expected, as actually thought. And so, wondering whether...
What, from sanitation or in general?
The total sanitation program, the latrine coverage program in India, doesn't really improve on nutrition and heights for children in places where it's being implemented. So whether these connections are somehow far-fetched or they need more different interventions than just putting latrines in villages, because there might be social issues that are not necessarily sanitation issues. My other question is on, you pointed out on Chinese government holding 80 million tons of grain. A few years ago, there was these banks that were speculating on food and how that one also entered into the global food crisis and food insecurity.
Did you say what, food banks?
Yeah. Banks, no, international banks, Barclays and others, that were speculating on food markets. And now we have not just banks, but also governments holding millions of tons from the markets. How much is this going to have on the net food importers that depend on grain? Obviously does not come out in this report very strongly.
Shenggen, let's collect a few more.
Sure.
Yeah?
Thank you. One of the good news about 2014 was this declining food prices. I agree on that only partially, because just ask you what would be the implication for obesity and what would be also the implication of low prices for food production, especially for smallholder farmers. Thank you.
Malik?
Okay, thank you. This is Mohammad Abdul Malek. I am a senior researcher at ZEP and also involved with IFPRI Bangladesh. So I'm happy to hear that you also evidenced like President Governor's response on the research findings and policy making. I agree with this. When this government is usually comes in power, agriculture gets to some extent good policies. And so this is one just I would like to mention, like you mentioned, when PLAT came in 1997-8, that time government accepted voluntary group development program. That is good, but when famine is not available, but a normal year is going on, that time what sort of targeting safety nets program would be more useful. As far as my experience from Prague, is one program, probably you know about it, like challenging the frontier for poverty reduction on targeting ultra poor. That is a CFPR-TOP. So this provides training and also asset transfer. I think this sort of program is very much important for reducing targeting ultra poor. This is one comment. And another one you told like women-friendly agriculture. Our agriculture needs to be more women-sensitive. That I completely agree. And I currently involved with research on tenant farmers, credit program with tenant farmers. And I just recently completed a randomized evaluation study, and based on 2 years findings, it is making some good impact on farm productivity, livelihoods, and so on. And we also find like it has been impacted on food insecurity reduction. But within 2 years, we did not find much impact on nutritional outcomes. And Dr. Akhtar Ahmed also, he was along with me in a television talk show, he was expecting after 4 years, last month we organized this, he was also expecting that after 4 years if we do similar revisit, probably we would have some impact on this. But what sorts of what sorts of interventions you are suggesting for making women friendly agriculture? This
Okay, that's
is
a clear question.
Last
No,
point.
no.
Okay.
No more. I thought there were hands up over there. Oliver?
Stefan.
Yeah, Stefan came late, he has to wait.
Yes, my
It's a
name
fun.
is Oliver, and the report is very, very interesting, and it captures quite a number of issues on the middle-income countries. Apart from the South-South cooperation that you mentioned, is there any other way that I would wish to hear from you? Is there any other way that you think the lower-income countries could benefit from this report and other programs that have been implemented in the middle-income countries? And I'm particularly hesitant on policy prioritization, as you say, because, for instance, the Millennium Development Goals, for instance, African governments, given this, that we've got the report, we've got the information, but we are still talking of the same issue several years later on. So is there a way that we can have, or we can build an effective governance structure, governance way that we can make sure that some of these interesting and important programs or policies on nutrition and food security will be implemented in developing countries?
Let me turn to Dr. Stefan Schmitz. Thank you for coming, although you are extremely busy these days. Commissioner for Food and Nutrition Security, Rural Development, beyond that, please.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry for being late. So hopefully you didn't already discuss my question. In 3 weeks' time, the heads of states and government of the G7 will meet in Schloss Elmau in the Bavarian Alps. Building on the intensive discussions we already had on that, what would be your perspective? What is the let's say the unique selling point for the G7? What, from your perspective, should be G7 commitment, action, or messages, and their role within a global architecture and global setting of efforts to overcome hunger? And globally in general, and with emerging economy in particular.
Can I build one question on that?
If it's really one, yes.
Very shortly. I think in essence, I think what you said is developed countries have no or a very small role for middle income countries to help them tackle all these issues. And on the other hand, you were mentioning G7 commitments at the end. So how does that fit together? Where do you see the role for developed countries to assist the middle income countries?
Very good. Okay, now lots of questions. I will select the ones I remember or the ones I can answer.
Remind you.
Right. For the Indian stunting rates, I think obviously there are many reasons. As I can see, to reduce child stunting, you need several essential components. One is food. Yes, the children have to have access to nutritious food, whether it's breastfeeding or supplement food. That's number one. Second, sanitation, right? You need a good sanitation, good hygiene, good health care. So all of these are quite important. Lack of one of them will not work. Some have good food, some have good sanitation. You need to combine these two together. I have to say some part of the states or some part of the country, in many states, they have achieved some good progress. Maharashtra is one. And probably overall, in a year or two, we will have news, actually not in a year or two, in a month or two, we will have access to the results of the latest survey. So we'll tell you some good story about that. Then the food stocks, well, in many countries like India, China, have very high level of stocks. Partly because of the 2007-2008 food crisis. So they were worried that if the global market doesn't have enough food there, then they will be caught in supplies. So partly because of it, and partly because of bad policy, using the purchase prices and subsidies to make sure that farmers have enough income through the price support, which I think is a wrong policy, not very efficient, not very effective. Direct income support will move farmers out of agriculture sector, probably long-term permanent solution. But on the how can we really manage the global food price volatility? I think the big countries like China and India can play a very huge role. Even in 2007, 2008, China had a pretty big stock, more than 100 million tons of grains, rice, wheat, maize together. That time, if China could release 10 million tons of rice to the international market, the prices are very high. That could help to reduce the global food price volatility. Farmers in China will benefit. Yes, domestic consumers may pay a little bit more, but they are not hungry people. So after 2007, 2008, food price actually are a little piece. Published in China, actually presented to the World Bank, former World Bank president. I said, how can we really use larger countries like China and India, US, Canada? Maybe the global institution can, let's say, ask China and India to designate some of the national stocks as emergency stock. But during crisis, that grains can be moved to other countries. I think we're good to work on that. But so that has not achieved much at a global level. But there have been several regional successes. One is ASEAN +3 rice regional reserves. Although it's very small, 1 million tons, but because of that, no countries have used export bans. And for the last 10 years, the global food prices, rice prices, not 10 years yet, 7 years, have been very stable. And similarly, in West Africa, they have also set up some West African mineral reserves. So, regional level, we have seen some progress. Now, how lower food prices would affect obesity and overweight, I don't think it's a big problem. It's knowledge information really more important than just lower food prices. And smallholders, yes, smallholders need to have a decent price. As long as prices in OECD countries, the emerging economies are not subsidized, so the prices will be higher. So fair, transparent prices, so smallholders will be able to benefit from that. But I would encourage smallholders go beyond just from the higher price. They could also engage in high value food production. They could also even move out to engage in non-farm activities, even move to cities. I call it move up or move out. Move up, high value chains, move out to non-agricultural urban centers. Yes, I think some of the programs implemented by IFPRI is very good, very successful. So we have worked with Mohamed Hussein and others. So we learn a lot from that program. We're targeting ultra poor very much. I think in 2007, right, when we had a conference, 2020 conference in China, we very much focused on ultra poor, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. Yes, so Iraq is a very good example to do that. And always that lead to a permanent solution to reducing hunger and malnutrition. Now on the gender, whether the gender improvement will help reduce hunger and malnutrition. I think yes. We will release the latest survey from Bangladesh, probably in a month or two. We already have the data, we are processing it. We have done some rough calculation for USID. The USID wants to access to that data to evaluate the Feed the Future program. The poverty has come down. Stunting, child stunting has come down, just from some rough calculation. We did a survey 4 years ago, right? This is our second survey. In Ethiopia, the same thing. So this is the beauty of our country program. We repeat our survey. So we have panel data to really evaluate the changes and also causes of these changes over time. And I also hope the researchers here can try to use the data for your study, for your research. The South-South learning, I have to say that some evidence show that yes, Africa, South Asia have benefited from some of the South-South learning, technology transfer, rise in Vietnamese, Japanese, and to some extent China, the rice technologies. You know, this American rice is a combination of African and Asian rice. Asian rice is a semi-dwarf, and African rice has some African resilience. I think the collaboration can come from several ways. One is investment. Several years ago, we were debating whether the investment from emerging economies simply just land grabbing, grab the land, where the local people benefit. Latest evidence shows that some of the investments did benefit smallholders through, let's say, outgrowth scheme, through access to technology to market. In Ethiopia, some of the research activities done by some of the European-based institutions, Nico from Belgium and others. So yes, they have benefited from that. I think more importantly is trade. So emerging economies should not treat Africa just as a natural resource supplier, particularly oil and minerals. Agriculture has great potential. Agriculture. So Africa can produce more, not only for their own citizens, but can also export, can export processed foods to Asia, India, China, and others. The mutual learning, the South-South learning, I think that some of the training programs can bring some of the best practice from, let's say, from India, or from China, and many other places. So I just finished my board meeting in China. We took our board, our senior managers, one of them is our African director. So he was very impressed by how many technologies, indigenous technologies, can be shared with Africa. Small mechanization tools. So I see a great potential to do more on that. Now, Stefan, I have to say that for the last several years, I think after 2007, 2008 food crisis, we made a progress. Yes, NGOs, many others, say, oh, it's not good enough. We made progress. Poverty has come down, hunger level has come down, investment has increased. So that good story needs to be told, needs to be evaluated. I think through these country programs, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Ghana, Bangladesh, we have several rounds of house of service. Right after the crisis, 3 years after crisis, now 7 years after crisis, let's use this house of service data to really track monitor progress. Just some initial evidence tells us that, yes, tremendous progress has been made. Stunting rate has come down. Poverty level, hunger level have come down. So let's not forget what we have, what progress we made. Yes, we must do more. If we are ambitious enough to end hunger and malnutrition by 2030, by 2025, we've got to do more. So the key message for G7 countries is, yes, we have made a progress. Whether it's Feed to the Future, whether it's the EC's program, whether it's let's look at hard evidence. We made a progress. The returns have been very high. Money is not wasted. And we've got to do more. Yes, so set the right priorities, more investment, better targeting. Now, what is the role of, let's say, in middle-income countries? My argument is G7 should also leverage middle-income countries. Firstly, to change their policy, their investment priorities to solve their hunger problem. Knowledge sharing, it's Germany or EC or US to share the knowledge information with middle-income countries to help them to reduce hunger and malnutrition, and to bring them as your partners to Africa, to South Asia, to work together to reduce poverty hunger with your money, with their investment, with their experience. I think we must work together, bring middle-income countries there, as your partner. I think they can play a big, huge role. Do not ignore them. Do not ignore them just because they still have many hungry and poor people. Do not ignore them because they also have experience to be shared with us. They also have money to invest in Africa or in South Asia. They also have trade. Now, in many middle-income countries have more trade than US, than Europe, with Africa. So how can we leverage them, to use them in a positive way? Don't treat them as your competitors. Treat them as your partners.
Shenggen, you know, if we pursue the goal of end hunger and malnutrition by 2025, as you do, that's 10 years. That will probably cost, according to our rough estimates, around 30 billion a year, maybe 35, given the short time horizon. What would be fair burden sharing? Let's assume this is roughly the ballpark figure, 25, 35 billion a year. Not for the time horizon. G7 have about 52% of global GDP. I would say they should cover half, as also Stefan and his team suggest. But how about the mix, the middle income countries in that equation? I would suggest the rich and the middle income people of this world have to pay to end hunger among the poorest nations. The middle income countries need to take care of themselves and cough up the money. Would you go along with that simplistic political equation?
I very much agree. So I think it's rather difficult for middle income countries to act like G7 countries to give money as direct aid. I still don't think that. But they are willing to provide investment, all this investment, not aid, investment is return, right? Trade, investment and trade. So I think the G7 countries still has to share a bigger burden, I'm afraid, if we really want to end hunger and malnutrition. But bring them along as your partner. And I think $30 billion a year probably is, to my own view, is probably underestimated. You probably need a bit more than that. It's $30 billion. I remember we did some rough calculation to achieve MDG, to cut poverty by half. Some of you remember we have a policy brief on that.
Mm-hmm.
That money required to me is much bigger than that. So yes, the G7 must accelerate its commitment to end hunger and malnutrition. So 22 or $23 billion commitment in the quota for 3 years. We must do more than that. 23. And I can see these G7 countries would benefit from that investment. Not only economic benefit, more trade, right? But also security. Well, recently you see lots of refugees from Africa. As I can see, the root cause is actually hunger, malnutrition, poverty from many African countries. Nigeria, Mali, Senegal, Ethiopia. Look at their background. You know, the families would connect some money together to send a boy, 15 years old, to this part of the world. They expect a big return from remittance. So if we can help them to reduce hunger, malnutrition, the development, probably will save much more money by fixing the refugee problem.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much money you will spend on that. But more important is the security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There were two more hands up. I would like to take those. You and you. Please introduce yourself to Shenggen.
My name is Vincent, engineering researcher here. My interest is on the food waste that you mentioned, that about 30 to 40% of food waste, and we are still thinking of production. Going forward, or moving forward, like what you did, the hope, what are you going to do, or what are the plans concerning reducing food waste from 30% or 40% downwards?
Yeah.
Because if we are producing 100 and about 30 to 40 is going waste, then the 30 to 40 can go a long way ending hunger by 2025 target.
Yes. Well, to eliminate food waste and also completely is not possible. Let's say to reduce from 30% to 15% is doable, is economically feasible. But reduce further, it will be very difficult. So we must produce more, not just to reduce food waste. So we must produce more. In the meantime, we reduce food waste. And in the 2 or 3 years, we thought that reducing food waste and loss could be one of the chapters of our global food policy report. We decided not to do it because that time we didn't have enough research-based evidence. So global food policy report differs from WDR, from SOFA, in that we use research evidence to guide our chapter. For 2016, we have enough evidence to look at that issue. How? I think firstly, I think the technology, certain technology can reduce food waste, right? Technology, whether it's harvesting, processing, number one. Number two, obviously, consumers' behavior, right? Consumers' behavior, how can we launch a campaign to reduce food waste, food loss? And number three, economic incentives. Right now, the prices of food have not reflected the full cost of the resources used in food production. In many cases, water is free or water is subsidized, fertilizer is subsidized, energy is subsidized. So if we integrate all these costs, plus there are some externalities, carbon emission, health consequences. So I would argue for a proper pricing of certain foods to make sure that all the costs, social, environmental, health costs, are integrated into pricing. So beef probably will be more expensive, not just because it uses more water on it, it will also have some negative, let's say, health consequences. We need to integrate that into pricing. So economic incentives, technology, policy to fix intensive problem, behavior change, all have to be part of the solution.
Alicia, last question.
My name is Alicia. I'm an economist here at SF. In your presentation, you put an emphasis on targeting smallholders for reducing poverty and enhancing food security. And most of the literature when talking, including the food security report, when talking about smallholders entirely focuses on crop producers, while omitting pastoralists and many livestock producers. And it may be a big omission because they represent a non-negligible part of smallholder farms, and also that research also shows that issues of poverty, marginality, lack of voice have higher concentrations in those pastoralist areas. Our research together with IFPRI also shows that on economics of land degradation, pastoralists are affected more by issues of land degradation than maybe crop producers. So in the report you are suggesting for smallholders to move up or out to be able to reduce poverty. Would you think the same strategy should apply to livestock producers, pastoralists, or do we need some different kinds of policies for them?
Definitely, it should include the pastoralists and also the small fishermen. So the smallholders here, it's not just the smallholder farms. It includes this livestock production, fishery, even forestry. to move them up, yes, so they can earn higher income by engaging it's a high value production, high value crops, move them up. Many small fishermen, patrons, if they cannot make a living from the current economic activities, well, they need to move out. Settlement in cities, non-agricultural activities. Actually, for the last 30 or 40 years, we have seen that trend. So many fishermen have moved to cities or to settlement. And many patronage smallholders have moved to settlements. So more needs to be done.
Well, colleagues, let me make a few closing remarks. We purposely had scheduled this seminar a bit longer than usual. And I'm sure you agree that this was very worthwhile. Shenggen, let me emphasize that IFPRI and CEF work very well together. We currently have projects together on markets and price volatility with IFPRI, on land and soil degradation. We have new work together on energy and the River Nile. We work together on issues of food security. There's a project. And on smallholder technology, the Gates project with collaboration of the India office of IFPRI. I could go on. That may be partly small activities under the radar screen of the IFPRI-Director General, but I assure you it's working out very well. And you will be happy to hear that a lot more money flows from CEF to IFPRI than from IFPRI to CEF. I say that in the presence of donors because it makes sense. You mentioned surveys. We do them together, and our students especially benefit tremendously from panel data sets from IFPRI in Ethiopia, in Bangladesh. We have worked with the first, I think, superb data set which ACTA has put together from 3 years ago, and we are looking forward to the next one. So I mention that because I think my colleagues at CEF may not know that we have this intensive interaction with IFPRI and through IFPRI with other CGIAR centers, and that's very productive and very useful. And we have lots of visitors from your crowd. So it was high time that you came and that you gave this talk. Let me close by emphasizing that I think IFPRI research and IFPRI leadership provided by you is critical to sort out the global governance issues on what role G7 for food and agriculture, what role G20, what role UN, what role the regional organizations in order to, and at national level. I think we have a messy situation there. That's not a topic for us at CEF. That's more an IFPRI topic. We enjoy modeling, data, theory, pursuing things which may lead nowhere because we are academics. We can afford that. I know IFPRI cannot. So we are risk-taking. Christian and I have talked with Shenggen before we came to this meeting about future collaboration in a field which we, and especially Christian, feel very strongly about, and where Christian will provide the leadership. That is in the whole field of One Health. People health, environmental health, plants, animals, and so on. I think this would be wonderful to continue working with IFPRI and others in the CGIAR on this particular topic. Thank you again, Shenggen. Thank you for being here, for your smart questions, and for your great lecture. A round of applause for Shenggen, please.